Sirius lapsed into silence, still staring at the cave wall. Buckbeak was ferreting around the rocky floor, looking for bones he might have overlooked. Finally, Sirius looked up at Ron. You say your brother's Crouch's personal assistant? Any chances you could ask him if he'd seen Crouch lately? I can try, said Ron doubtfully. Better not make it sound like I reckon Crouch is up to something dodgy, though. Percy loves Crouch. And you might try and find out whether they've got any leads on Bertha Jorkins while you're at it, said Sirius, gesturing to the second copy of the Daily Prophet. Bagman told me they hadn't, said Harry. Yes, he's quoted in the article in there, said Sirius, nodding to the paper, blustering on about how bad Bertha's memory is. Well, maybe she's changed since I knew her, but the Bertha I knew wasn't forgetful at all. Quite the reverse. She was a bit dim, but she had an excellent memory for gossip. It used to get into her a lot of trouble. She never knew when to keep her mouth shut. I can see her being a bit of a liability to the Minister of Magic. Maybe that's why Bagman didn't bother to look for her for so long? Sirius heaved an enormous sigh and rubbed his shadowed eyes. What's the time? Harry checked his watch, then remembered it hadn't been working since it had spent over an hour in a lake. It's 3:30, said Hermione. You better get back to school, Sirius said, getting to his feet. Now listen. He looked particularly hard at Harry. I don't want you lot sneaking out of the school to see me, all right? Just send notes to me here. I still want to hear about anything odd, but you're not to go leaving Hogwarts without permission. It would be an ideal opportunity for someone to attack you. No one's tried to attack me so far, except a dragon and a couple of Grindylows, Harry said, but Sirius scowled at him. I don't care. I'll breathe freely again when this tournament's over, and that's not until June. Don't forget, if you're talking about me amongst yourselves, call me Snuffles, okay? He handed Harry an empty napkin and flask and went to pat Buckbeak goodbye. I'll walk to the edge of the village with you, said Sirius. See if I can scrounge up another paper. He transformed into the great black dog before they left the cave, and they walked back down the mountainside with him, across the boulder-strewn ground and back to the stile. Here he allowed each of them to pat him on the head before turning and setting off at a run around the outskirts of the village. Harry, Ron, and Hermione made their way back into Hogsmeade and up towards Hogwarts. I wonder if Percy knows all that stuff about Crouch, Ron said, as they walked up the drive to the castle. Maybe he doesn't care. It'll probably just make him admire Crouch even more. Yeah, Percy loves rules. He'll just say Crouch was refusing to break them for his own son. Percy would never throw any of his family to the Dementors, said Hermione severely. I don't know, said Ron. If he thought we were standing in the way of his career, Percy's really ambitious, you know. They walked up the stone steps into the entrance hall, where the delicious smells of dinner wafted towards them from the great hall. Poor old Snuffles, said Ron, breathing deeply. He must really like you, Harry. Imagine living off brats. Chapter 28. The Madness of Mr. Crouch. Harry, Ron, and Hermione went up to the Owlery after breakfast on Sunday to send a letter to Percy asking, as Sirius suggested, whether he had seen Mr. Crouch lately. They used Hedwig because it had been so long since she had had a job. When they watched her fly out of sight through the Owlery window, they proceeded down the kitchen to give Dobby his new socks. The house elves gave them a cheery welcome, bowing and curtsying and bustling around making tea again. Dobby was ecstatic about his present. Harry Potter is too good to Dobby, he squeaked, wiping large tears out of his enormous eyes. You saved my life with that gilly Dobby, you really did, said Harry. No more chance of those eclairs, is there? Said Ron, who was looking around at the beaming and bowing house elves. You've just had breakfast, said Hermione irritably, but a great silver platter of eclairs was already zooming towards them, supported by 4 elves. We should get some stuff to send up to Snuffles, Harry muttered. Good idea, said Ron. Give Pig something to do. You couldn't give us a bit of extra food, could you? He said to the surrounding elves, and they bowed delightedly and hurried off to get some more. Dobby, where's Winky? Said Hermione, who was looking around. Winky's over by the fire, miss, said Dobby quietly, his ears drooping slightly. Oh dear, said Hermione as she spotted Winky. Harry looked over at the fireplace too. Winky was sitting on the same stool as last time, but she had allowed herself to become so filthy that she was not immediately distinguishable from the smoke-blackened brick behind her. Her clothes were ragged and unwashed. She was clutching a bottle of butterbeer and swaying slightly on the stool, staring at the fire. As I watched her, she gave an enormous hiccup. Winky is getting through 6 bottles a day now, Dobby whispered to Harry. Well, it's not strong, that stuff, Harry said. But Dobby shook his head. "'Tis strong for a house elf, sir," he said. Winky hiccuped again. The elves who had brought the eclairs gave her a disapproving look as they returned to their work. Winky is pining, Harry Potter, Dobby whispered sadly. Winky wants to go home. Winky thinks Mr. Crouch is her master, sir, and nothing Dobby says will persuade her that Professor Dumbledore is her master now. Hey, Winky, said Harry, struck by a sudden inspiration, walking over towards her and bending down. You don't know where might, what Mr. Crouch might be up to, do you? Because he stopped turning up to the Triwizard Tournament. Winky's eyes flickered, her enormous pupils focused on Harry. She swayed slightly again and then said, Master has stopped coming? Yes, said Harry. We haven't seen him since the first task, and the Daily Prophet's saying he's ill. Winky swayed some more, staring blurrily at Harry. Master's ill? Her bottom lip began to tremble. But we're not sure if it's true, said Hermione quickly. Master is needing his Winky, whimpered the elf. Master cannot manage by himself. Other people manage to do their own housework, you know, Winky, Hermione said severely. Winky, not only doing housework for Mr. Crouch. Winky squeaked indignantly, swaying worse than ever and slopping butterbeer down her already heavily stained blouse. Master's trusting Winky with the most important the most secret. What? Said Harry, but Winky shook her head very hard, spilling more butterbeer down herself. Winky keeps her master's secrets, she said mutinously, swaying heavily now, frowning up at Harry with her eyes crossed. You is nosing you is. Winky must not talk like that to Harry Potter, Dobby said angrily. Harry Potter is brave and noble, and Harry Potter is not nosy. He is nosing into Master's private and secret Winky is a good house elf Winky keeps her silence people trying to pry and poke Winky's eyelids drooped, and suddenly, without warning, she slid off the stool into the hearth, snoring loudly. The empty bottle of butterbeer rolled our way across the stone-flagged floor. Half a dozen house elves came hurrying forward, looking disgusted. One of them picked up the bottle, and the others covered Winky in a red-checked tablecloth, tucking the ends neatly, hiding her from view. We is sorry you had to see that, sirs and miss, squeaked a nearby elf, shaking his head and looking very ashamed. We is hoping you will not judge us all by Winky's, sirs and miss. She's unhappy, said Hermione exasperatedly. Why don't you try and cheer her up instead of covering her up? Begging your pardon, miss, said the house elf, bowing deeply. But house elves has no right to be unhappy when there is work to be done and masters to be served. Oh, for heaven's sake, Hermione cried. Listen to me, all of you. You've got just as much right as wizards to be unhappy. You've got the right to wages and holidays and proper clothing. You don't have to do everything you're told. Look at Dobby. Miss will keep Dobby out of this? Dobby mumbled, looking scared. The cheery smiles vanished off the faces of the elves around the kitchen. They were suddenly looking at Hermione, although she was mad and dangerous. We has your extra food, squeaked an elf at Harry's elbow, and he shoved a large ham, a dozen cakes, and some fruit into Harry's arms. Goodbye. The house elves crowded around Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and began shunting them out of the kitchen, many little hands pushing the small of their back. Thank you for the socks, Harry Potter, Dobby called miserably from the hearth, where he was standing next to a lumpy tablecloth that was Winky. You couldn't keep your mouth shut, could you, Hermione? Said Ron angrily as the kitchen door slammed shut behind them. They won't want us visiting anymore. We'd have tried to get more stuff out of Winky about Crouch. Oh, as if you care about that, scoffed Hermione. You only like coming down here for food. It was an irritable sort of day after that. Harry got so tired of Ron and Hermione snipping at each other over their homework in the common room that he took serious food after the Owlery that evening on his own. Pigwidgeon was much too small to carry an entire ham to the mountain by himself, so Harry enlisted the help of two school owls as well. When they had set off into the dusk, looking extremely odd carrying a large package between them, Harry leaned on the window-sill looking out of the grounds, at the dark, rustling trees of the Forbidden Forest, and the rippling sails of the Durmstrang ship. An eagle owl flew through the coil of smoke rising from Hagrid's chimney. It soared towards the castle, around the Owlery, and out of sight. Looking down, Harry saw Hagrid digging energetically in front of his cabin. Harry wondered what he was doing. It looked as if he was making a new vegetable patch. As he watched, Madame Maxime emerged from the Beauxbatons carriage and walked over to Hagrid. She appeared to be trying to engage him in conversation. Hagrid leaned upon his spade, but did not seem keen to prolong their talk, because Madame Maxime returned to the carriage shortly afterwards. Unwilling to go back to the Gryffindor Tower and listen to Ron and Hermione snarling at each other, Harry watched Hagrid dig into the darkness swallowed him, and the owls around Harry began to awake, swooshing past him into the night. By breakfast the next day, Ron's and Hermione's bad moods had burned out, and to Harry's relief, Ron's dark predictions that the house elves would send up substandard food to the Gryffindor table because Hermione had salted them, proved false. The bacon, eggs, and kippers were as good as usual. When the post owls arrived, Hermione looked up eagerly. She seemed to be expecting something. Percy won't have had time to answer yet, said Ron. We only sent Hedwig yesterday. No, it's not that, said Hermione. I've taken out a subscription to the Daily Planet. I'm getting sick of finding everything out from the Slytherins. Good thinking, said Harry, also looking at the owls. Hey, Hermione, I think you're in luck. A gray owl was soaring towards Hermione. It hasn't got a newspaper, though, she said, looking disappointed. But to her bewilderment, the gray owl landed in front of her, closely followed by four barn owls, a brown owl, and a toddy. How many subscriptions did you take out? Said Harry, seizing Hermione's goblet before it was knocked over by the cluster of owls, all of whom were jostling close to her, trying to deliver their own letter first. What on earth? Hermione said, taking the letter from the gray owl and opening it and starting to read. Oh, really? She sputtered, going rather red. What's up? Said Ron. It's how ridiculous. She thrust the letter at Harry, who saw that it was not handwritten, but composed from pasted letters that seemed to be cut out of the Daily Prophet. You are a wicked girl. Harry Potter deserves better. Go back to where you came from, Muggle. They're all like that, said Hermione desperately, opening one letter after another. Harry Potter can do much better from the likes of you. You deserve to be boiled in frog spawn. Ouch! She had opened the last envelope, and a yellowish-green liquid, smelling strongly of petrol, gushed over her hands, which began to erupt in large yellow boils. Undiluted Beauxbatons pus, said Ron, picking up the envelope gingerly and sniffing it. Ow, said Hermione, tears streaming down her eyes, as she tried to rub the pus off of her hands with a napkin, but her fingers were now so thickly covered in painful stores that it looked like she was wearing a pair of thick, knobbly gloves. You'd better get to the hospital wing, said Harry, as the owls around Hermione took flight. We'll tell Professor Sprout where you've gone. I warned her, said Ron as Hermione uh, hurried out of the Great Hall, cradling her hands. I warned her not to annoy Rita Skeeter. Look at this one. He read out one of the letters Hermione had left behind. I read in Witch Weekly about how you are playing Harry Potter false, and the boy has had enough hardship, and I will be sending you a curse by the next post as soon as I can find a big enough envelope. Blimey, she better watch out for herself. Hermione didn't turn up for herbology. As Harry and Ron left the greenhouse for the Care of Magical Creatures class, they saw Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle descend the stone steps of the castle. Pansy Parkinson was whispering and giggling behind them with her gang of Slytherin girls. Catching sight of Harry, Pansy called, Potter, have you split up with your girlfriend? Why was she so upset at breakfast? Harry ignored her. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much trouble the Witch Weekly article had caused. Harry told them last lesson when they finished with Unicorn. Who had told them last lesson that were finished with unicorns, was waiting for them outside his cabin with a fresh supply of open crates at his feet. Harry's heart sank at the sight of the crates. Surely not another Skrewt hatching. But when he got near enough to see what was inside, he found himself looking at a number of fluffy black creatures with long snouts. Their front paws were curiously flat, like spades, and they were blinking up at the class, looking politely puzzled at all the attention. These are Nifflers, said Hagrid, when the class had gathered around. You find 'em down mines mostly. They like sparkly stuff. There you go. Look. One of the Nifflers had suddenly leapt and attempted to bite Pansy Parkinson's watch off her wrist. She shrieked and jumped backwards. Useful little treasure detectors, said Hagrid happily. Thought we'd have some fun with them today. See over there? He pointed to the large patch of freshly turned earth Harry had watched him digging from the allery. I buried some gold coins. I've got a prize for who picks the Niffler that digs up the most. Just take 'em off your valuable. Just take off your valuables and choose a Niffler, and get ready to set 'em loose. Harry took off his watch, which he was only wearing out of habit, as it didn't work anymore, and stuffed it into his pocket. Then he picked up a Niffler and put its long snout into Harry's ear and sniffed enthusiastically. It was really quite cuddly. Hang on, said Hagrid, looking down the crate. There's a spare Niffler here. Who's missing? Where's Hermione? She had to go to the hospital wing, said Ron. We'll explain later. Harry muttered. Pansy Parkinson was listening. It was easily the most fun they had ever had in Care of Magical Creatures. The Nifflers dived in and out of the patch of earth as though it was water, scurrying back to the students who had released it and spitting gold into their hands. Ron's was particularly efficient. It had soon filled his lap with coins. Can you buy these as pets, Hagrid? He asked excitedly as a Niffler dived into the soil splattering his robe. Your mom wouldn't be too happy, Ron, said Hagrid, grinning. They wreck houses, Niffler. I reckon they've nearly got the lot now, he said, pacing around the patch of earth while the Nifflers continued to dive. I only buried 100 coins. Oh, there you are, Hermione. Hermione was walking towards them across the lawn. Her hands were very heavily bandaged, and she looked miserable. Pansy Parkinson was watching her beadily. Well, let's check how you've done, said Hagrid. Count your coins, and there's no point trying to steal any, Goyle, he added, his beetle-black eyes narrowing. It's leprechaun gold. Vanishes after a few hours. Goyle emptied his pockets, looking extremely sulky. It turned out that Ron's Niffler had been the most successful, so Hagrid gave him an enormous slab of Honeyduke's chocolate for a prize. The bell rang across the grounds for lunch. The rest of the class set off back to the castle, but Harry, Ron, and Hermione stayed behind to help Hagrid put the Nifflers back into their boxes. Harry noticed Madame Maxime watching from her carriage window. What have you done to your hands, Hagrid said, looking concerned. Hermione told him about the hate mail that she had received that morning in the envelope full of boob-tuber pus. Ah, don't worry, said Hagrid gently, looking down at her. I got some of those letters and all after Rita Skeeter wrote about me, Mum. You're a monster and you should be put down. Your mom killed innocent people, and if you had any decency, you'd jump into a lake." "No," said Hermione, looking shocked. "Yeah," said Harry, heaving the Niffler crates over by his cabin wall. "They're just nutters, Hermione. Don't open 'em if you get any more. Chuck 'em straight into the fire." "You missed a really good lesson," Harry told Hermione as they headed towards the castle. "They're good Nifflers, aren't they, Ron?" Ron, however, was frowning at the chocolate Hagrid had given him. He looked thoroughly put out about something. "What's the matter?" said Harry. "Wrong flavor?" "No," said Ron shortly. "Why didn't you tell me about the gold?" "What gold?" said Harry. "The gold I gave you at the Quidditch World Cup," said Ron. "The leprechaun gold I gave you for my omnioculars. In the top box. Why didn't you tell me it disappeared?" Harry had to think for a moment before he realized what Ron was talking about. "Oh," he said, the memory coming back to him. "I don't know. I never noticed it was gone. I was more worried about my wand, wasn't I?" They climbed up the steps to the entrance hall and went down into the great hall for lunch. "Must be nice," Ron said abruptly, and they sat down and started serving themselves roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. "To have so much money you didn't notice a pocket full of galleons goes missing. Listen, I had other stuff on my mind that night," said Harry impatiently. "We all did, remember?" "I didn't know that leprechaun gold vanishes," Ron muttered. "I thought I was paying you back. Shouldn't have given me that Chudley Cannon hat for Christmas." "Forget it, all right," said Ron. Ron speared a roast potato at the end of his fork, glaring at it. "I hate being poor." Harry and Ron looked at each other. Neither of them really knew what to say. "It's rubbish," said Ron, still glaring at his potato. "I don't blame Fred and George for trying to make some extra money. I wish I could. I wish I had a Niffler." "Well, we know what to get you for next Christmas," Hermione said brightly. Then, when Ron continued to look gloomy, she said, "Come on, Ron, it could be worse. At least your fingers aren't full of pus." Hermione was having a lot of difficulty managing her knife and fork. Her fingers were so stiff and swollen. "I hate that Skidoo woman," she burst out savagely. "I'll get her back for this if it's the last thing I do." Hate mail continued to arrive for Hermione over the following week, and although she followed Hagrid's advice and stopped opening it, several of her ill-wishers sent howlers which exploded at the Gryffindor table and shrieked insults at her for the whole hall to hear. Even those who hadn't read Witch Weekly knew all about the supposed Harry, Crumb, Hermione triangle by now. Harry was getting sick of telling people that Hermione wasn't his girlfriend. "It'll die down, though," he told Hermione. "If we just ignore it, people will get bored with the stuff that she wrote. People got bored with the stuff that she wrote about me last time. I want to know how she's listening into private conversations when she's supposed to be banned from the grounds," said Hermione angrily. Hermione hung back from their next Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson to ask Professor Moody something. The rest of the class was very eager to leave. Moody had given them such a rigorous test of hex deflection that many of them were nursing small injuries. Harry had such a bad case of twitchy ears. He had to hold his hands clamped over them as they walked from class. "Well, Rita's definitely not using an invisibility cloak," Hermione panted 5 minutes later, catching up with Harry and Ron at the entrance hall, and pulling Harry's hand away from his wiggling ears so he could hear her. "Moody says he didn't see her anywhere near the judge's table at the second task, or anywhere near the lake." "Hermione, is there any point in telling you to drop this?" said Ron. "No," said Hermione stubbornly. "I want to know how she heard me talking to Victor, and how she found out about Hagrid's mum." "Maybe she had you bugged," said Harry. "Bugged?" said Ron blankly. "What? Put fleas on her or something?"